Anderson.
And I'm Dan Novak.
This is VOA News. I'm Marissa Melton. The White House says President Joe Biden will travel to Poland later this month ahead of the one-year anniversary of the start of the war in Ukraine. AP's Ed Donahue reports.
Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre says the president will meet with Poland's president about bilateral cooperation,
as well as our collective efforts to support Ukraine and bolster NATO's deterrence.
The president is trying to rally allies as the one-year anniversary of the Ukraine war approaches. National Security Council spokesman John Kirby says the visit is meant to give Ukraine a boost, too.
We know the next weeks and months are going to be difficult and critical, especially for their armed forces, and the United States is going to continue to stand by them.
Russia is believed to be planning a renewed offensive in conjunction with the anniversary. Ed Donahue, Washington.
A U.S. fighter jet shot down a mysterious high-altitude object that traveled into American airspace Friday, acting on orders from President Biden after it was determined that the object posed a potential threat to commercial aviation. At a briefing, National Security Council spokesman John Kirby said the object was not as big as the balloon from China.
It was much, much smaller than the spy balloon that we took down last Saturday. The way it was described to me was roughly the size of a small car.
According to the Pentagon, the object first moved into U.S. airspace late Thursday and was tracked by the U.S. Northern Command as it moved over the skies of northeastern Alaska, staying consistently at about 12,000 meters. U.S. officials said planes approached the object and determined that no human was in it before one of two F-22 fighter jets sent on an intercept course shot it from the skies with an AIM-9X Sidewinder missile. More on that story and everything we're covering at our website, voanews.com. This is VOA News. Moldova's government has collapsed with pro-Western Prime Minister Natalia Gavrilita's resigning to a series of crises that have gripped the small nation since Russia invaded its neighbor Ukraine. AP Washington correspondent Charles de Ledesma reports.
Gavrilita has told a news conference, "The time has come for me to announce my resignation," saying no one expected her government, elected in the summer of 2021, would have to manage so many crises caused by Russian aggression in Ukraine. The premiership has been marked by a long string of problems, including an acute energy crisis, skyrocketing inflation, and several troublesome incidents linked to the war. A new government will be nominated by President Maia Sandu to be approved by Moldova's 101-seat parliament. I'm Charles de Ledesma.
Florida's legislature on Friday voted to expand Governor Ron DeSantis' ability to relocate migrants. Reuters' Tamara Lindstrom reports.
Florida's legislature on Friday voted to expand Governor Ron DeSantis' controversial effort to relocate migrants anywhere in the United States and bolster his election police force, backing some of the Republicans' top priorities ahead of a widely anticipated 2024 White House campaign. Last year, DeSantis used taxpayer money to fly dozens of South American migrants from Texas to the wealthy enclave of Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts, saying he was responding to the federal government's failed immigration policies.
That's Reuters' Tamara Lindstrom reporting. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said several Russian missiles had flown over Moldova and NATO member Romania on Friday, and they were a challenge to the military alliance and collective security.
Ворог сьогодні запустив щонайменше 70 ракет.
He said this proves once again that terror does not and will not understand any boundaries, that defending Ukraine is defending all of Europe and the whole world, every country that wants to live. Today's missiles are a challenge to NATO and collective security. This is terror and must be stopped. Russia unleashed a new wave of missile strikes on energy infrastructure across Ukraine on Friday, causing emergency power outages for millions of people and prompting new calls by Kyiv for Western arms. A Nicaraguan court sentenced Catholic Bishop Rolando Alvarez to more than a 26-year prison term on Friday, a day after the cleric and critic of President Daniel Ortega declined to be expelled to the United States as part of a prisoner release. And the United Nations Security Council will next week discuss if it will allow the UN to deliver aid to rebel-held northwest Syria through more than one Turkish border crossing following Monday's devastating earthquake. Marissa This is VOA News. I'm Marissa Melton.
Mr. President! Mr. President, do you know who sent the object? Were you able to recover it yet? Was it a balloon, Mr. President?
You're hearing reporters yelling questions at U.S. President Joe Biden after a U.S. F-22 fighter jet shot down an unidentified object over Canada on Saturday. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced the shoot down on Twitter and said it took place over the Yukon Territory in the country's northwest. He said Canadian forces would recover and analyze the wreckage from the object. On Friday, President Biden ordered a shoot down of an unidentified flying object over sea ice near Dead Horse, Alaska. The U.S. military has said little so far about the recovery efforts. Last Saturday, a U.S. fighter jet brought down what the government called a Chinese surveillance balloon off the coast of South Carolina. China's government has said it was a civilian research vessel. The United States has blacklisted 6 Chinese entities linked to Beijing's aerospace programs. AP correspondent Jackie Quinn.
It's an economic blacklisting that will make it harder for the 5 companies and 1 research institute to obtain technology exports from the United States. It's in response to China's surveillance balloon that crossed U.S. airspace and was shot down last weekend. This punitive move is likely to further escalate tensions between the U.S. and China, sparked by the balloon incident. Officials in Washington maintain that balloon could detect and collect intelligence signals, although China says it was just a weather research device. Another aerial object shot down Friday off the coast of Alaska is still under investigation. I'm Jackie Quinn.
Iran is celebrating the 44th anniversary of its 1979 Islamic Revolution. This is VOA News. Rescue workers in Turkey have recovered a woman from the rubble of a collapsed building days after a 7.8 magnitude earthquake hit the country. AP correspondent Charles de Ledesma.
Emini Murat is carried out by rescue workers on a stretcher as other rescuers continue the search. Rescuers on Saturday have also pulled 5 members of a single family, the Aslans, alive from the wreckage of their home in the hard-hit town of Nurdag in Gaziantep province, 129 hours after the quake. They first extricated the mother and daughter from among the debris, later reaching the father, but he insisted that his other daughter and son be saved first. I'm Charles de Ledesma.
The death toll from the earthquakes was raised on Saturday to more than 28,000 people in Turkey and Syria combined. Visiting the area, UN humanitarian chief Martin Griffiths said the death toll of the devastating earthquakes is likely to continue growing.
I think it's really difficult to estimate, obviously very precisely, because you need to get under the rubble. But I'm sure it'll double or more. And that's terrifying.
Palestinian health officials say an Israeli settler fatally shot a Palestinian in the northern West Bank, while a child wounded in a car ramming incident in Jerusalem has died a day after the attack. Also Saturday, Gaza militants fired a rocket toward Israel that was intercepted. The Palestinians say a 27-year-old was shot to death when armed settlers entered a Palestinian village in the West Bank. Israeli police say an investigation has been opened. The deaths are the latest in bloodshed that has been rising sharply in the West Bank and East Jerusalem in recent months. An enraged mob in central Pakistan stormed a police station Saturday, grabbing a detainee facing blasphemy charges. They lynched him before setting the body on fire. The incident happened in Nankana Sahib, a remote city in the most populous Punjab province of the Muslim-majority country. Area police officials said the victim had been taken into custody for allegedly desecrating the Quran. And a doctor says at least 57 people have been confirmed dead in days of clashes between anti-government fighters and Somaliland security forces in the disputed city of Las Anad after local leaders said they wanted to rejoin the federal government of Somalia. Somaliland is a region that separated from Somalia 3 decades ago. It now seeks recognition as an independent country. More on this and all the stories we're covering at our website, voanews.com. I'm Marissa Melton, VOA News.
This is VOA News. I'm Tommy McNeil. Turkish justice officials are targeting contractors allegedly involved in a shoddy and illegal construction after a pair of earthquakes on February 6 collapsed thousands of buildings in southeast Turkey and northern Syria. Rescuers pulled more survivors from the rubble on Sunday, including a pregnant woman and 2 small children, but the death toll from the quakes has surpassed 33,000. 113 suspects have been detained as Turkey vowed to thoroughly investigate those potentially responsible for the collapse. That as the death toll from the tragedy continues to climb. Reuters' Lauren Anthony reporting.
This is the moment police detained the developer of one residential complex that collapsed as he prepared to board a plane at Istanbul airport for Montenegro on Friday evening. The man told prosecutors he didn't know why the complex collapsed and that his Montenegro trip was unrelated. Opponents of Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan have accused his government of not enforcing building regulations and of misspending taxes levied after the last major earthquake to make buildings more quake-resistant. Rescuers were still pulling survivors from rubble in both Turkey and Syria on Sunday, but chances of finding people alive are dwindling.
That's Reuters' Lauren Anthony reporting. The United States is ramping up its relief efforts for the region.
The U.S. Agency for International Development pledged more than $85 million in assistance after Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke with his Turkish counterpart to ascertain their needs.
That's VOA Cindy Sain reporting. There is more at voanews.com. Again, voanews.com. This is VOA News. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on Sunday confirmed that on his order, a U.S. fighter jet did shoot down an unidentified object that was flying high over the Yukon the day after the U.S. took similar action over Alaska.
North American Aerospace Defense Command, the combined U.S.-Canada organization that provides shared defense of airspace over the two nations, detected the flying object at high altitude Friday evening over Alaska, U.S. officials said. It crossed into Canadian airspace on Saturday.
NORAD confirmed that an unidentified object entered unlawfully Canadian airspace. It represented a reasonable threat to civilian aircraft. So I gave the order to take it down.
F-22 fighter jets have now taken down 3 objects in the airspace above the U.S. and Canada over 7 days. Steve Karish, VOA News, Washington.
The International Olympic Committee is defending its decision to help athletes from Russia and Belarus qualify for the 2024 Paris Summer Games, despite a harsh rebuke from Ukraine's president. AP correspondent Jackie Quinn reporting.
The head of the International Olympic Committee, Thomas Bach, says they've been advised by the UN they can't discriminate against athletes from Russia and Belarus.
History will show who is doing more for peace, the ones who try to keep lines open and to communicate, and or the ones who want to isolate or divide.
During World War II, Germany and Japan were excluded from the 1948 London Olympics. I'm Jackie Quinn.
2 officials say Sudan's ruling military has concluded a review of an agreement with Russia to build a Navy base on the Red Sea in the African country. They say the deal is now awaiting the formation of a civilian government and legislative body to be ratified. The officials said Moscow met Sudan's most recent demands, including providing more weapons and equipment. The officials did not provide further details. Sudan has been without a parliament since a popular uprising forced the military overthrow of longtime autocrat Omar al-Bashir in April of 2019. Israel's president has appealed to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to delay a contentious plan to overhaul the country's judicial system and instead seek a compromise with his political opponents. President Isaac Herzog made the appeal Sunday in a primetime nationwide address the day before. Netanyahu's coalition is to take its first steps toward implementing the plan in a parliamentary vote. I'm Tommy McNeil, VOA News.
And I'm Dan Novak.
This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. The United Nations held an emergency meeting Monday on how to boost aid to rebel-held areas in Syria as anger grows over a sluggish international earthquake response to the pariah nation. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, isolated and subject to Western sanctions, called for an international assistance to help rebuild infrastructure in the country, where the UN estimates more than 5 million have been left homeless. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said Assad has agreed to open 2 more border crossings to allow aid. Syria's civil defense teams and local people are still searching for survivors under the rubble in the city of Aleppo, 1 week after the devastating 7.8 magnitude earthquake struck northern Syria and neighboring Turkey. Machinery was being used there to move piles of rubble, but much of the searching is being done by hand. The death toll in both countries has surpassed 35,000. NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg told reporters on Monday the feared new major Russian offensive in Ukraine has already started and that Ukraine needs NATO nation support. VOA Steve Karish reports.
Speaking ahead of a meeting of the military alliance, Stoltenberg said there were no signs that Russian President Vladimir Putin was preparing for peace, adding that he expected the issue of supplying aircraft to Ukraine to be discussed at the upcoming 2-day meeting. He called on NATO members to continue providing urgent military support to Kyiv. Steve Karish, VOA News, Washington.
Ukraine's top general and the top U.S. Army commander in Europe discussed military aid and training for Ukrainian forces in a telephone conversation on Monday, the eve of the meeting, the Ukrainian Defense Ministry said. This is VOA News. Moldova's president accused Russia on Monday of planning to use foreign saboteurs to bring down her tiny country's leadership, stop it joining the European Union, and use it in the war against Ukraine.
Planul pentru perioada următoare presupune acțiuni.
President Maya Sandu made her comments after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said last week his country had uncovered a Russian intelligence plan, quote, for the destruction of Moldova after days after the country's government resigned. Sandu, whose country borders Ukraine, has repeatedly expressed concern about Moscow's intentions towards the former Soviet Republic and about the presence of Russian troops in the breakaway region. The New Zealand government declared a national state of emergency Tuesday after a tropical storm lashed the North Island. The country's Minister for Emergency Management signed the declaration as tens of thousands of homes were left without power following heavy rain and strong winds. Floodwaters and landslides have cut off many settlements across the country, including some near Auckland, New Zealand's largest city. New York police have a suspect in custody for a violent rampage involving a rental truck on the streets of Brooklyn. AP correspondent Julie Walker reports.
The driver's son, Stephen Soar, tells the AP his father, Wang Soar, has a history of mental illness and had been living in Las Vegas. Police Commissioner Keyshawn Sewell says it's not terrorism.
Behind us is a U-Haul truck stopped successfully by the NYPD, ending a violent rampage through Brooklyn.
Catherine Aronova saw the U-Haul run a red light, hit a delivery worker, and drag him.
He was like bleeding all over. His head was covered with blood. He was like unconscious.
Police say 7 people were hit and an officer injured in the rampage. In Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, I'm Julie Walker.
China said on Monday U.S. high-altitude balloons had flown over its airspace without permission more than 10 times since the beginning of 2022, drawing a swift denial from Washington. China's accusation widened a dispute with the United States that began after the U.S. military shot down on February 4th what it says was a Chinese spy balloon, whose appearance prompted top U.S. diplomat Antony Blinken to cancel a trip to Beijing designed to ease tensions. Since then, the U.S. military has shot down 3 other flying objects over North America, most recently on Sunday, the Pentagon said. Find more on these stories and the rest of the day's news on our website, voanews.com, or follow us on the VOA mobile app. I'm Joe Ramsey.